Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with a vivacious Charles Coulombe.
Vivacious. Well, vivacious. Happy days are here again. The skies above are clear again. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Juneteenth. Happy Maximilian's Murder Day. Well, all right. Maybe that I don't know about happy. But anyway. And because it's coming up, happy Feast of St. John and happy St. John's Eve. And for that matter, because, yeah, it'll still be time yet, but Dominion Day, the Feast of the Precious Blood, St. Junipero Serra's Day is coming up, and Born on the 4th of July is coming up.
Yeah.
The fireworks will go off over in LA that is, however, open by dictate, by masterful order of His Excellency, the Governor. All hail the Newsom. What?
Gonna be a lot of fireworks again.
And he's reopening the state just for me.
You know, I wasn't there at our Knights of Columbus fireworks last year because I was kind of actually scared of COVID. July, things were going crazy. There were riots.
Pretty bad.
But what the boys told me is they never had sold so many fireworks in ever. They sold everything they had, and then they did a complete reload, and then they sold all of that, and literally there was like no box. I don't think there was a single box left, they said.
There was one sparkler that had slipped out accidentally. They still had that. But it was a crazy time. I do want to say a couple of words about Juneteenth, which is now a federal holiday beginning this year. If you don't know what it is, for those of you who don't, June 19th is the day of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's the day of the ending of slavery in those parts of the United States that were occupied by the Confederate government. That is to say, it didn't really take effect anywhere because obviously the Confederates ignored it, and the areas that were occupied by the Union were explicitly exempted. Nevertheless, it's as good a day as any to celebrate the ending of slavery in the United States. That said, and I think it's very important that we remember what a grand thing that was, and what a great thing Black history is, simply because, for many of us, the way the woke people deal with it and their critical race theory, a lot of folks want nothing to do with it. They won't want to hear anymore. It's tiresome. Well, don't let the woke ruin Black history for you. It's an important part of our American story, an important part of our human story. And like anything else, we mustn't concede it to the wokesters who have no brains and are worthless scum. I mean this in a nice way, of course. One of the considerations that came to my mind today, it also being the anniversary of Benito Juarez's murder of Maximilian and the firm establishment of his puppet regime in Mexico, is how different history would have been if Maximilian had succeeded and Mexico had had a strong and independent government free from control by the United States. It would have been very different. Similarly, one wonders if slavery had ended in this country not as a stratagem in the bloodiest war we ever fought, followed by the evil twins of Reconstruction and Jim Crow, but if it had ended peacefully the way it did in the Caribbean and Brazil, if our racial relations would be somewhat different, and if there would be less room for the woke termites to eat their way in. Worth thinking about. The other thing that one also considers is that today there are many slaves still held in Africa. in the Muslim countries, black slaves. We never talk about them. We ignore them entirely because we don't really care when brown people enslave black or vice versa. That's just not important. That, dear friends, that's racism. You know, the unfortunate truth is that had it not been for slavery, except for the Cape, which was strategically important to get from Europe to India, the European powers would have had very little interest in Africa. It was only with time that the ones already established in the former slave trading areas realized that there were all kinds of goodies to be taken from the interior. But if that had never happened, then Africa would have been left unevangelized, which wouldn't have been a good deal because, of course, the only place for the church is really growing today is in Africa. We wouldn't have had people like Cardinal Sarah or Cardinal Arinze. And instead, unopposed, the Muslims would have continued their great long march south and east through Africa, which was partly countered by the arrival of the Europeans. And what would have been the result? I can promise you there would have been no Juneteenth. There would have been no emancipation. The only emancipation that ever took place in Muslim countries took place because European gunboats demanded it. It was the British that ended the great slave market in Zanzibar, and they did so with their gunboats. When I wrote my history of the Papal Zouaves, I was impressed by a particular episode. In the territories that were occupied by the Europeans, slavery was ended. And then after they had ended it earlier on, it was forcibly ended if they could get their hands on it, which wasn't always the case. But in the Congo Free State, before the Belgians annexed it, there was no such protection because the Congo Free State didn't really have a very well organized government. It was just there to extract rubber and as much dough as it could. So the missionaries there did not have the protection that they did in areas that were actually colonized by European powers. The result was that the villages of converts that they founded became easy pickings for the Arab slave traders on the coast, the East Coast. Well, Cardinal Lavijari, not very happy with this development, hired a former Papal Zouave officer, Captain Joubert, who in turn hired a bunch of his old pals. And they went down to the Congo Free State and trained the converts to defend themselves. And in a very short time, they had the Arab slave traders packing very quickly. They didn't appreciate it, I can assure you, but they ran back to the coast. And then a little while later, as I say, the British gunboats arrived in Zanzibar and convinced the Sultan that it was time to close out the slave trade at the source. Anyway, Joubert settled down, married a local lady, and in his part of what's now the Congo, there are still a number of his descendants who are very prominent. A wonderful story. God brings good out of evil, and we are all, ladies and gentlemen, the beneficiaries of past injustices. So remember that when you point the finger at others. Don't forget to keep your mirror close at hand. So, let me see, what else can I tell you? St. John's Eve is coming.
Yeah, we got a comment from Danny. He says, just arranged a time to have dinner with a friend, someone who I introduced to Off the Menu show just recently. He suggested a bonfire on June 23rd.
Yes, St. John's Eve, the Halloween in summer. Good time to go, ghost stories, fairy stories, etc. But see if you can get your bonfire blessed by the priest, because there is, in fact, a prayer to do so in the Roman Rituale. It's a wonderful time. Also, if you can't do that, read the entry on St. John the Baptist Day in Dom Guéranger, and he goes into great detail about the St. John's bonfires. If you don't happen to have a copy, you can look it up in Sensus Fidelium. that website has Dame Garanger's liturgical year written out for you. So look up the Feast of St. John the Baptist. Oh, I should also mention, before I forget, that St. John the Baptist is the patron of a wonderful people, the French Canadians. He is for us what St. Patrick is to the Irish, St. Anthony to the Italians, St. George to the English, St. David to the Welsh, St. Andrew to the Scots, St. Boniface to the Germans, Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception to the Americans, St. Maron to the Maronites, all those guys, St. Mark to the Copts. So remember, St. John's Eve, do the bonfire, read up, tell your weird stories. St. John's Day, honor the forerunner, and be kind to any French Canadian you may meet. Or do as the everyone does on St. Patrick's Day, go into a French restaurant or a taverne, if you can find one, drink heavily, and become a once-a-year French Canadian.
Oh.
Well, you know, on St. Patrick's Day, everybody's Irish. On St. Jean-Baptiste, everybody should be French Canadian.
I detect some resentment toward the Irish.
I've got no resentment of the Irish. None at all. They're wonderful. You can tell by their voting records.
Okay, very good, Charles. Very good.
Well, you don't want to discuss that any further.
The Irish? No.
I asked Officer Clancy, you know, about the referenda in Ireland, what he thought.
Yeah, what'd he say?
Well, you know, this isn't it the pity that myself and so many of the lads emigrated? I can assure you, if we were back in Ireland, the voting would have gone a little differently, you know. And I said, how could you be so sure? Well, sometimes people need a bit of persuading to understand their own best interests. And I said, well, I don't understand, officer. I mean, don't people know their own business? Oh, no, laddie buck. Oh, God save you, no. Often enough, a person needs to be made to understand what's good for them. They don't understand on their own. That's why you have officers of the law like myself to help them understand. And he assured me that he and maybe 50 or 100 of his ilk had been in Ireland for both referenda. It would have gone the right way.
Okay, Charles, are you ready for the means of production?
Nationalize the means of production.
For the common good.
Sure, let's see. What do we got?
We've got a lot of comments. Let's see here. So first one, Dwarf of Alexandria, who commented through Patreon. He says, I came to the show for the monarchism, and I'm still here for the inside jokes.
Oh, Tyrone would be happy to hear that. And so would the chicks in the secretarial poll.
Absolutely.
And the happy lads down in the postal department.
Oh, and you're forgetting someone, Oswald Dupree.
I'm not forgetting Oswald.
Yeah. All right.
I never forget Oswald. Oswald is constantly on my mind as the quintessence of all that is evil.
All right.
In the 1970s.
Yes, the decade that never should have happened.
That's right. And it should go and take Oswald with it.
All right. Next one is from Pammy, who says, love it when Mr. Franchini gets that puzzled look on his face when Sir Charles quotes a song to make reference about something from the old days.
What does she mean? You mean like, who put the bop in the bop shabop shabop? Who put the dip in the dip de dip de dip? Who put the rom in the rom ba bom ba bom? Who put the shit ram in the ramalama ding dong? What was it? Oh gosh.
Is that the Book of Love? Who wrote the Book of Love?
No. Who put the bop in the dip de dip de dip? Who was that man? I'd like to shake his hand. He made my baby fall in love with me. But No, the Book of Love is who wrote the Book of Love? Tell me, darling, did you write the Book of Love?
Yeah. Okay. Very good, Charles.
You don't want to hear others?
No, certainly people have other means if they're interested in doo-wop.
16 candles make a lovely light. Yeah?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
that speaks to me.
Good.
All right. Let's see. We got another.
Lollipop, lollipop, my lolly, lolly, lolly. What?
Control thyself. Right.
I hear the whippoorwill call to the dove. Tammy, Tammy, Tammy's in love.
All right. Next comment on YouTube from Imperfect. He says, I'm slightly concerned by how much I enjoy watching Charles grind Vincent into submission. Perhaps like you're doing so now with...
What a horrible thing to say. I'm here helping you with your appreciation of culture. I mean, all right. Let's reframe the whole question, shall we? Think about this for a second. All right? Now think very, very, very carefully.
Okay.
Think, if you will, and I want you to wrap your mind around this very, very important concept. You ready?
Ready.
You
Ready to wrap
walk
my
with
mind
me?
around it. Yeah.
All right. Here it is. There's a moon out tonight. Actually, no, not that one. This is a better one. You ready?
Ready.
The night was dark, and the moon was yellow, and the leaves came tumbling down. I was standing on the corner when I heard my bulldog bark. He was barking at two men who were gambling in the dark. Stagger Lee and Billy, two men who gambled late.
Why don't you sing Sugar Shack for us?
No, Sugar Shack. We don't do Sugar Shack. Homie don't play Sugar Shack. We don't do that. No, we don't do Sugar Shack. Definitely not. I got it. You ready?
Ready.
See the pyramids along the Nile. Watch the sunrise on a tropic isle. But remember, darling, all the while, you belong to me. I think I could go into Forever Plaid. What do you think?
I think let's cut it short for this episode. I think we've gotten a large enough survey of your talents.
Thank you. All right, let's move along then. Fine, I don't care.
All right. We've got a meme from Twitter from Lady Monarchist. Tumblr House. Ha 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 ha. Italians then. I fight for an invincible empire stretching across most of the known world using weapons and technology our enemies could scarcely imagine. Italians now. I cook the meatball.
Now, I could hardly argue with this. I think this contains a certain existential truth that we need to look at, that we need to examine in great detail, not to say painful detail. I think that this is an area that requires a great deal of our attention, that requires us to embrace with an open heart what's happening here.
Okay.
Are you ready to open your heart?
I'm not ready to open my heart, and I'm not ready to examine what's happening here.
Oh, I see. Well, okay. I guess that settles that issue. Next.
All right. So we have got one final item on the memes of production. I don't know why I'm doing this because it's not really a meme. It's actually deadly serious. I'm gonna share screen because I haven't showed Charles this, so he sees my screen. Okay, so Charles,
I see both of us.
yeah, well that's my screen, but I haven't brought it up yet. I just want to preface this. I mean, the world is filled with so much propaganda and lies. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I hardly watch television anymore because it's so much to handle. You know what I mean? It just triggers you nonstop. But this past week just absolutely took the cake for me in terms of lies and deceit and propaganda. I was just on my way to work. My mom's got Fox News on. Okay. And I just glanced at the screen, and you would not believe the horror that I saw and the lies.
Let's see it.
Can you believe that?
Oh yeah, I can believe it. See, one thing is that New Jersey has the world famous Paramus Mall.
So for those who are listening to just the podcast, the audio, 2021's best states to live. Number 1, New Jersey. Out of all the states in the United States, they say New Jersey. Can you believe? I mean, come on.
I think that the truth had to out. I think Callahan's hot dogs have been completely vindicated from the charge of being horse meat.
This is Babylon B level. This is like, is this satire or is this reality?
No, it's obvious reality. I mean, Snooki has settled down with her baby. The situation has gained weight. I think Jersey is settling down. The Paramus Mall is once again a center of cultural and educational fervor. Cardinal Tobin, of course, has imported Italian talent from overseas.
To me,
I guess it's a great place to live if you're living in Cardinal Tobin's rectory. Anyway, the point is.
Oh, well, okay, go on with your point.
Well, the point is, I think New Jersey is finally, the Garden State is finally being recognized for what it is. America's best place to live next to New York and Massachusetts and Maine and Louisiana and other places and Pennsylvania.
To me, this survey illustrates the enormous disconnect from reality that our population is under, where we're just in fantasy land, right? We just
name one state that you would consider more enjoyable to live in than Jersey. Name one.
Pennsylvania.
Okay,
Easy.
name two.
New York.
Name three.
You're just gonna have me go through the rest of the United States of America.
And then the provinces of Canada, and then the United Mexican States. All right, Jersey or Nayarit. Jersey, Baja California Sur.
And I've got some support on this one. Anne, superfan Anne, who's a patron, she says, I've been to the Paramus Mall. Thumbs down. Malls in general are tiresome and expensive. As Chris said, the Paramus Mall has a reputation of being the center of the materialistic and capitalist universe. So that's what you are? That's what you promote? You promote materialism?
The Paramus Mall is about spiritual values.
Unbridled capitalism?
No, spiritual values.
What spiritual values?
Music.
Music's a spiritual value?
Of course it is. What do you think Palestrina was?
What was that?
Palestrina, the great church composer. You know, he gave us all sorts of wonderful polyphony. And I tell you that the Paramus Mall, back when the Wurlitzer organ store was going, was the center for that kind of thing.
The center of what kind of thing?
You know, musical stuff. spiritual stuff. It's organs. Wurlitzer organs. It doesn't get more religious than a Wurlitzer organ. A Wurlitzer organ says church service. Yeah. And in truth, in those days, entering the Paramus Mall was like entering a temple.
Yeah.
You heard the organ music the minute you set foot. And the smell you smelled, sadly, was not incense, but a couple of whiffs of the Union Carbide plant down the way. But they had other smells to drown those out. You'd only smell that if you were at the far end of the mall and the wind was over the Union Carbide factory. And that's closed, I think. I don't think the Union Carbide factory is there anymore, so you don't get the chemical smell that you used to have.
Yeah, so leave poor Union Carbide alone.
Union Carbide did its best to contaminate acres upon acres of fresh virgin Jersey soil.
All right. Well, let's continue this a little bit. Move this into the questions. But the first question is from none other than Andrew from New Jersey.
Hey, Andrew, Jersey pride.
He's developing quite a reputation for himself. So he says, first of all, I want to thank Vinny for announcing that I now identify as Andrew from New Jersey. Someone who is biologically from Long Island. This has been a hard...
What? Andrew, I take back what I said. You're living a lie. Embrace Long Island. I'm saying from Peter Luger's to Montauk Point. That is your home, Long Island. I'm telling you. Levittown, Oyster Bay, the Hamptons. It's all yours. Love it.
Well,
Queens, not so much.
He says, it has been a hard journey filled with much soul searching, but it feels great to finally be free from the shame and come out of the closet as Andrew from New Jersey. I think
Andrew. It's time to come home. The Empire State awaits to enfold you in its arms.
I thank you both in advance for using my preferred pronouns, I and yous guys.
Yeah, you can do that on either side of the Jersey line, but never mind. All right, you know what, Andrew? Whether you're going to self-identify as from Long Island or from Jersey, either way, off the menu embraces, supports, and celebrates your choices, because that's the kind of guys we are.
All right, he says, now on to the questions. I recently finished reading 2 books which, to my surprise, had many similarities between them that I was not expecting. They were both written decades ago, yet so cogently and prophetically about our current crises and turmoil and the causes thereof that they both could have been written this year. Furthermore, they both, in their own way, read like a call to action for the faithful. I also ordered both from TumblerHouse.com and received free shipping and handling as I ordered them in a bundle that exceeded $25. The 2 books in question are Revolution and Counter-Revolution by Plinio Correa de Oliveira and Every Man Today Call Rome by Charles Coulombe.
I want to emphasize Andrew from New Jersey is, say it with me, not an actor.
You know, I tell you what, mentioning your bundle of books and your book orders, Andrew, I take back what I said. You're right in my book.
See, void were prohibited. No CODs. Sorry.
All right. So he has some questions regarding these 2 books.
No CODs. Even though you're a nice guy, you're not getting a COD. I'm sorry.
Does Charles agree with my assessment that these 2 books, while different in some important areas, can be read as companion books that complement each other? Please explain either way.
No, I would say so, because of course we're both looking at the same phenomenon, albeit from different, in a sense, different points of view, not doctrinal, but simply the basis of experience. I mean, obviously, he was writing it he was writing considerably before I was, and as a Brazilian, I was looking at the same phenomenon from a younger viewpoint because I was like younger and stuff, and as an American. But we certainly looked at the same long decline of Western Christendom, full stop. I hate dividing it into Western and Eastern simply because, despite the Great Schism and all that, sociologically, Orthodox societies are extremely similar to Catholic. So I don't like making those divisions when I'm looking at the cultural aspects, if you will, the sociological aspects of these things. But we were looking at basically the same sad story of decline, and we found very similar causes for it.
Had Charles read Revolution and Counter-Revolution at the time he wrote Every Man Today Called Rome? And was this an influence on his writing in any way?
Well, that's a question that becomes a little hard to explain, to answer properly, because I certainly had. I read it in college, Revolution and Counter-Revolution, and I was quite excited with the thesis. But you've got to bear in mind that at that same time, I read a lot of stuff of similar nature, with vaguely similar descriptions of the phenomena that we were exploring, i.e., the decline of the West. So I read Oswald Spengler, I read Chamorros, I read Erich von König-Ledin, Hubertus von Löwenstein, Schaffeneck. I read Thomas Molnar, The Counter-Revolution. G.K. Chesterton, of course, Belloc, the Servile State, G.A. Penty. I mean, I read a lot of these sorts of writers. Christopher Dawson, Arnold Toynbee. I mean, I ate this stuff up. Müller Vandenbroek, I should say. And I tried to get as wide a scope as possible in terms of not religion, because I was looking primarily for Catholic, or at least Catholic-esque Christian writers, but in terms of national identity and scope. Because I reasoned that since the phenomenon we were dealing with was transnational, I wanted to get as many different views and voices as possible. Plinio's work was certainly very cogent, very concise, and all that. Was it more or less of an influence on me than the other stuff? It's very hard for me to say, because I read all this stuff, and so much of it too. That's when I wasn't drinking heavily while I was at Cal State Northridge. You would find me in the library reading this kind of thing, which of course had nothing to do with any of my classes. But I had never had access to this sort of material in this volume before, and I ate it like cotton candy. I really did. That reading really helped establish my views of things. I was also, of course, at the time corresponding with the Archduke Otto von Habsburg, who recommended a number of authors to me, which I read. So it was, let's just say that my 2 years at Northridge were a very fruitful time for me. I also read a lot of literature at the same time, especially medieval chivalric romances and things like that. I mean, my classes required very little attention from me, and they got it very little. And now that was where I did a great deal of my background reading, and certainly Plinio was a part of it, but I couldn't tell you what proportion.
Did Charles intend for Every Man Today Called Rome to be a call to action for Catholics? What did he want people who read this book to do after reading it? What was the reason Charles wrote this book in particular?
Well, I originally wrote it to explain to my classmates in high school, Catholic high school, of course, most of whom, in no small part because of what they've been taught or mistaught, no longer went to Mass. I wanted to write for them an explanation of why they didn't believe, which seemed very obvious to me. But that required an explanation of why Catholicism in the United States had declined. And that in turn required an explanation of the bigger picture, which I did my best to provide as succinctly as I could. I wrote it with the intention of helping them regain their faith. Later, when it was accepted for publication, then yes, it certainly became my idea that it would be a sort of call to action for the members of my generation. Some of whom, I mean, it was popular enough for a book of its type then, and it's still being read. It was republished, as you know, which is good. But it certainly had a certain impact, as I have heard from people from the time it came out. What part it really plays in the bigger scheme of things, I have no idea. We'll find out. Mm-hmm. I wrote it, when I was 24, and I'm 60 now. So a lot of water has gone into that bridge. But having reread it, there's nothing I would disagree with in it now.
Would one of the call to actions be for every man today to call Rome?
Yes. Call Rome and demand from the Holy Father a full accounting, and don't explode when he says nothing. I mean, after all, if the Curia Cardinals couldn't get any, if the 4 Cardinals couldn't get any response from the dear Holy Father, you won't.
Okay. Did you want to go into more of why the title, or?
Well, yeah, the title, originally it was E.T. Call Rome, and the publisher was afraid that there would be copyright issue. That was the original. Then it became E.T. Call Rome, and then Every Man Today Call Rome, with the E.T. very prominent in hopes that people would pick up on it. And they did. I mean, you got to remember, you'll find this hard to believe, as now that I'm the youngest of the boomers, but I did write it when I was quite young. And I really hoped that my generation would do something. And by my generation, I don't mean our older brothers. I mean specifically my age group. That we might do something useful to, pull the collective heads of society and the church out of their collective posteriors. As you see, we have failed magnificently to do that. I hope a future generation will take up the call. I mean, the truth doesn't change. As I said, in rereading it, I thought, would I change anything today? Nah, I wouldn't. The problem that I saw back then has simply continued to replicate, but it hasn't changed. If you're diagnosed in the primary stage of a disease and it's not treated, you go through the secondary stage, the tertiary stage, you still got the same disease. It's just whereas before you had these vague headaches, now there are chunks of you falling off.
Are you more hopeful today than when you wrote the book, or are you less hopeful?
Differently hopeful.
Okay.
Now I'll explain what I mean by that. When I was young, you have to understand, when I wrote the book, Reagan was president and John Paul II was Pope. JP2 had just revived Eucharistic devotion, benediction, and so on, which had completely died out in the States anyway. And the indult had just come in. it came in before the publication of the book. After I wrote it, but before the publication, and it was in the wind. Reagan was, I mean, he wasn't the greatest thing since plaid paint, but he was the greatest president I lived under. And back then in the early 80s, we really had a lot of hope that the damage of the 60s would be somewhat rolled back. Well, our hopes were to a degree satisfied with the fall of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. And despite all the garbage that's happened since then, I'm grateful to have seen that, because I grew up under the shadow of the Cold War. And when I was at military college, was absolutely certain I would die fighting the Soviets. And that didn't happen, and it's not going to happen. Some other terrible thing might, but not that. So, in the initial years of the fall of the Soviet Union and satellite states, all kinds of pre-communist stuff reemerged, and it was a joy to see it. So I don't regret that. But I have to say that in my early 20s, it appeared that we had really good leadership at the very top, both in the church and in the American state. Now, no, it doesn't seem that way at all. But things are better at the grassroots level as far as the church is concerned. When I wrote that book, we didn't see Tridentine masses in most places. We certainly didn't have them in LA. Going back a couple of years before my writing of the book, the sad truth of the matter is that my faith in the church was truly faith in things unseen. No Tridentine masses. A liturgical life where put the hand in the hand of the man who stilled the water was the most popular processional hymn. And where, as I say, prior to JP2, Eucharistic devotion was non-existent. It was horrible. And in those days, my 4 staffs of Catholic life that sustained me in that horrible desert were my parents, Cardinal McIntyre, till he died in '79, the then Romeward bound Anglo-Catholics of St. Mary of the Angels, Hollywood, and the Russian Rite Catholics of El Segundo, St. Andrew's Church. And that was pretty much it. That was all I had, you know. I had a high school with a blatantly heretical text, Christ Among Us. Then I went away to New Mexico Military Institute, where by surest chance, if chance exists, we had a chaplain, a Catholic chaplain who was incredible, Father Moynihan. He was an interesting character. He had been an armor officer in World War II. After the war, he became a Trappist monk. And then when the Trappists got rid of silence, he figured, well, I might as well do something useful, and became a parish priest. And he was excellent in every stage of the word. And I ran into some other people here and there, but it was pretty bleak. And now the situation is so much better than it was then. And it's also obvious, despite the best efforts of the elderly non-binary people that run the church today, that that's not where the younger people are. You'll notice that so many of the Holy Father's appointments are so elderly. And it's almost, although not so complete, but it's almost analogous to Mr. Biden being president. You know, the geriatric liberals are really all they've got. You couldn't call Kamala Harris a liberal or anything else. She's just, you know, Mayor Brown's first squeeze, and probably our future president if Uncle Joe doesn't make it through his term. So to answer your question, I am quite hopeful today, but in a very different way and for very different reasons than I was then. And there's something else too I should point out. St. Ambrose and St. Augustine lived during a time when the Roman Empire was tattering to its end, and the affairs of the church were not very great either. But they had a tremendous amount of hope. Now, there was no way that they could have foretold the coming of Clovis and the Franks, which would be the beginning of the restoration of sorts. Yet, had they not done what they did, there would not have been a Clovis. So, you have to remember that we do not know the full effects of what we're doing. All we can do is the best we possibly can and leave it to God to do whatever He chooses to do with it.
Let's see. Another question. At the end of the book, there is a P.O. box address and a call to start a correspondence with Charles. Is this still a working P.O. box?
It is, except it's no longer 771, it's 660771. And I wouldn't try to start a correspondence with me until I get back to LA on a more permanent basis in 2023.
Okay. Andrew's final question. This is only somewhat related to Oliveira's book, but what's with the P in TFP? Tradition? I get it. We love tradition. Family? Yes, we love families. Very important. Got it. But property? I mean, don't get me wrong, I love property. I own some myself. But why is property raised to the level of tradition and family? Why not faith or virtue or the like?
The reason being that, as you know, Plinio was a great believer in the maintenance of traditional-minded elites. He actually wrote a book called Nobility and Other Analogous Elites about their proper role in life, in national life, in cultural life, public life. Now, traditionally, such elites were based on, you guessed it, landowning, property. And one of the reasons he started his group was to combat the communist-inspired attempts at confiscation of the properties of the Brazilian aristocracy.
I see.
So it refers really partly to their idea about elites and the place of elites, the formation of elites in society, but it also certainly relates to the historical period in which he began his work.
All right, a bunch of questions from Matthew, who
Oh
says,
boy, okay. Ready to roll.
Dear esteemed business magnate and absolutely clean Sicilian mafia who? Vinny the Don Franchini.
That's you, boss.
I recently purchased Vicars of Christ, as well as Puritan's Empire.
Wow.
And I have to say, I was quite impressed with your service. You managed to get the brick all the way through my window of my third floor college dorm room. And I didn't even have to pay extra, thanks to your generous offer of free shipping on orders over $25. Sorry, no CODs, batteries not included.
Very true. Some assembly required. You'll notice, ladies and gentlemen, that we don't charge for the bricks when you buy $25 or more. And those aren't cheap, but you don't have to pay for them.
So he goes on and says, I have 3 questions for Charles.
Okay.
First, I recently started talking to a girl who is very interested in her Scottish heritage, which I share to some degree with her. But she has said that she is not Christian and prefers Celtic paganism because it is the religion of her Scottish ancestry. Is there any advice Charles could give me to better understand that religion and how I might introduce her to Catholicism?
Well, several things. Firstly, nobody knows what Scottish paganism was like. What calls itself Celtic paganism and all that is basically created out of conjectures, presumptions, assumptions, that all of the best, most honest neo-Druids will admit that there's very little historical basis for what they do. So the first thing you have to point out to her is that what she considers the religion of her ancestors is not. It was a synthetic thing created as late as the 1920s in terms of doctrines, and it's not a real thing in that sense. Whereas Catholicism is what it is, what it is, what it is, what it is for 2,000 years. And it certainly was the religion of the majority of the Scottish people and most of Scotland's heroes from the 5 to 700s, depending on where you were, until the so-called Reformation. Catholicism, in fact, was the great defender of Scottish nationhood, whereas the Presbyterians were quite happy to sell Scotland to England if it meant getting rid of that nasty church. But you look at Sir William Wallace, King Robert the Bruce, Mary Queen of Scots, Bonnie Prince Charlie, devout Catholics all.
Okay.
And I speak as a descendant of a man who fought at Culloden.
He says, similarly, would Charles please explain some of the history of the conversion of Scotland and any peculiarities of Scottish Catholicism? Along with the obligatory, would he please discuss now?
Yes, he would, and so he shall. Well, basically, Scotland was converted by several different individuals. You got to remember what we call Scotland had 4 basic founding peoples. The Britons, whom the Romans had colonized, and then who were pushed westward by the Anglo-Saxon invaders, they clustered in what are now called Strathclyde and, to a degree, Galloway in southwestern Scotland. And they were evangelized by a man named St. Mungo or St. Kentigern, same person, fairly early on. The Anglo-Saxons from the south and east, they were Catholicized and conquered what was called Lothian, which is the southeastern portion, including Edinburgh. The northern part of the country was settled by the Picts, and I forget the name of the man who converted them. But then the Irish invaders, who were called Scots, were converted by St. Coulombe. And these 4 peoples, in the course of time, merged politically and became the Kingdom of Scotland. So, as for its peculiarities, well, they followed what we call the Celtic customs that came from Ireland and St. Patrick, but conformed to the Roman customs after the Synod of Lindisfarne. They had a sort of unique order of monks called the Chaldees, the Calidae, the Companions of God, who founded a lot of the monasteries in Scotland. And then in the 1000s, Queen Margaret of Scotland was an Anglo-Saxon princess, the wife of the king. St. Margaret began the process of transforming the Chaldees into Benedictines. So, and of course, St. Andrew, the apostle, is the patron of Scotland. And St. Andrew's Day, November 30th, is the great Scottish feast day. Sort of like St. Jean-Baptiste Day for the French Canadians.
Got it. All right. Matthew's last question. Finally, I recently got confirmed in the Catholic Church by Bishop Thele of the SSPX. Recently, it has felt like one of the only safe places for me, as I have a Sedevacantist friend who has mostly convinced me that the new rite of consecration of bishops is invalid. And so there are very few, if any, Novus Ordo priests remaining who are validly ordained either. I'm attracted to the Sedevacantist position because it makes a great deal of sense, since heretics cannot be pope. And he cites cum ex apostolus officio, a bull by Paul VI. But
No, it can't be Paul the Sixth. It must be Paul the Fourth.
Oh, okay. But on some level, it seems to be denying the authority of the Pope or the inviolability of the Catholic Church. Could Charles please discuss his opinion on the Sedevacantist position and the new rite of bishop consecration?
I sure could. The only real Catholic in the world is me.
That's my favorite meme, actually. That's one of my all-time favorite memes.
It's the ultimate, unfortunately, the ultimate end of that kind of thinking. And don't get me wrong, I've got Sedevacantist friends, but your gut feeling is correct, because if their position is true, since there are no more cardinals, since the people of the city of Rome elected communists and other weird mayors, and they were the people, of course, who would have elected the Pope once upon a time, and since there is no emperor, we'll not have another Pope. So the gates of hell prevailed, the church is over, bye-bye, no more. Now, earlier on, I forget if this was the pre-show, but I spoke about this, about how theologically, philosophically, this presents all sorts of problems, the situation we're in. Historically, it's not, because there have been some dodgy pontificates when you examine their origins and so forth, and also some of the beliefs of some of the holders. But the truth is, no power on earth can judge a pope. A council cannot depose a pope. That's the conciliarist heresy. It was condemned. Now, that's true of councils. How much truer it is of private individuals like myself who decide that the Pope's a heretic. Now, I may not agree with what he says. I may think he's dead wrong on all sorts of things. I may think he's doing a horribly bad job. But I am not in a position to depose him. I don't have that power. Just like so much that various hierarchs do, my attempting to do so would be ultra vires, beyond my power. That having been said, however, popes can be a problem, without a doubt. But we can't depose them much as we might like to. If God wants to get rid of him, he'll croak. If not, we have to presume that bad popes, like bad priests in general, are, as St. John Eudes put it, the most obvious manifestation of God's anger toward his people. Meaning, we haven't been as wonderful as we think we are. The other thing I have to say is that I do not agree that the consecrations are invalid. I could go on a long, long song and dance, but I won't. I'm going to save my time, myself the time. I will recommend to you, not Father, God help us, he would be insulted if I said so, Michael Davis's book, The Order of Melchizedek, which you can get from Roman Catholic Books, booksforcatholics.com. It's just been reprinted. It's a great book. It goes into this whole issue very thoroughly. And I found very convincing when it came out in '93, and I still do. So I recommend you read it. I understand how my Sedevacantist friends feel. Sometimes I wish they were right. But we have the world we have, and not the one we wish.
You had a copy of Puritan's Empire back there. I just noticed in your stack of books.
I do, and it's not even mine. It's from the library here.
They got it in an Austrian library.
Yeah. They also have Vicars of Christ.
Wait, before Tumblr House or after Tumblr House?
Before the first edition.
Well, that is a better edition. All right, and it kills me to say that, but it's very well done.
It should. Put your hand out. Put your hand out. No. You know how it goes. Back, hand down. No. Put the back of the hand so I can hit it.
Put the back of the hand so you can hit it?
Yeah, not your palm, the back of the hand. Whap! Whap!
Slap on the wrist?
Yes.
All right.
Don't you ever admit that anybody else's stuff is better than Tumbler House. Even if it's so patently true, you'd be a moron not to notice. Don't ever admit that.
Wow, Charles. All right.
We have a reputation to maintain. I promised your Uncle Giovanni I would never let anybody talk trash about Tumbler House's products. He said, you know, it doesn't matter if they have the same bookbind that Tan used to have, you know, where all the pages will go flying out. It's still the best binder in the world. You tell him. I said, I will, Giovanni, I will. That's Don Giovanni to you, kid. Yes, Don Giovanni.
All right. Enough of that.
I was respectful to your uncle, you know. I don't know if you realize that.
I realize that and I appreciate it, Charles. Because you wouldn't be here with us if you weren't.
That's for sure.
So, a little bit of serious stuff here. We have a prayer intention that is very important to me. So Luis, who is a big fan of the show, he has a prayer request for us. He's a really good guy, very devout. He's got a Spanish podcast. I think I don't know if Charles has been on his show. I think he's have you been on his show, Charles? You've been on a lot of people's shows. He could be.
I could have been. Okay. I hope so.
But he's a good man, and his wife is struggling with cancer. They're a young couple, and the oncologist suggested to bring her into hospice and to quote unquote live day by day. Her name is Christy, and so I want to say a prayer for her. Have us all say a prayer for her, and if you would keep her in your prayer intentions. Yeah. So can we say an Ave for her?
Of course. Domini Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Saint Dymphna,
pray for us.
Saint Peregrine, pray for us.
us.
Domini Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Okay.
I'm sorry to hear that, Luis. God bless and keep you and your wife and daughter, and well, we'll see what happens. May we all meet merrily in paradise.
Yeah. Okay. All right. A bunch of questions from Bronislav.
Bronislav, you know, he comes from Eastern Europe, from the Subcarpathians, where the werewolves howl late at night and the vampire bats fly.
Yeah, so about your accent, he says, rebound from Eastern Europe, even though Slovakia is Central Europe, of course. I have to say this first. The random Hollywood type vampire / Eastern European sounds nothing like Slovak accent of English. I understand that from my name, it being very similar to Eastern European ones, it is easy to think that we also sound like this, but it is interesting that compared to Czechs or Poles, which with Slovaks are considered to be Western Slavic languages, the Slovak pronunciation of English is the most neutral in its pronunciation. The easiest pronunciation to spot is Czech, not just in English, but still it is very different from the Eastern or Southern Slavic pronunciations. But I quite like Charles's accent. I'd like to advance on my...
Thank you so much. It is so appreciated. Here in the heart of the old empire. You have problems with it, obviously.
It's so over the top. It's like,
Over the top. Why do you say it is over the top, huh? You must understand that as the moonlight shines down over the Carpathian Mountains, illuminating the broken towers and battlements of my ancestral castle, it brings to mind the days when I was alive, and when we fought the Turks at every pass and mountain valley. But now I look back over all the centuries I have been in existence, and I have one thing to say. Never give credit.
what?
Never give credit.
Yeah, is there more to that thought? I don't understand.
No, that's it. That's it. There's no more. Don't give credit. They die on you. I
They
know this. They die on you. They leave you owing you thousands of piastres and rubles and whatever it is you have. They die leaving thousands in debt to you. And you can collect. They are dead. You cannot get it from them.
Oh, never
So
give
don't.
credit as in loan money to people.
Yes, this is what I am saying.
Oh. I thought you meant give credit as in compliment people.
Oh no, always compliment. People are so much happier when you compliment. Yes. Please, Mr. Renfield, it is so good to have a visitor from England, your wonderful country of which I have heard so much. And how is your Queen Elizabeth? Well, she's very fine, Count. I see. And how is her dear sister Mary? Uh, Wrong, Elizabeth, Count. Oh, yes, yes, I know. This one is the third? No, the second. Yes. What?
Okay, I'm getting creeped out, Charles. Creepy vampire. Okay.
As opposed to what? Creepy vampire as opposed to, hi, I'm Bobby, the jolly vampire.
What's
Oh, I can see that. You know, hey guys, it's really great. You've got such lovely looking necks. You don't need all that blood flowing through your veins. You can spare a little for it for your old pal Bob, huh?
what's her Kirsten Dunst?
Oh gosh. Look, vampires are by their nature creepy. You don't have a non-creepy vampire.
Okay.
It's
Well,
I mean you just can't.
Your creepiness took the cake. Let's put it that way.
Well, that may be, but you think, or if not Bobby, how about hi, I'm Matt, the surfing vampire. Yeah, I can't really get too close to, I can't do any daytime surfing anymore. It's all, like surfing by moonlight, because like otherwise I'd fry to a crisp.
Okay.
Now,
We're
is
done
he
with the
creepy?
vampires. We're done with the
But
vampires. We're moving on.
but but was he creepy?
No, just boring.
A boring vampire.
Yeah.
Do you find surfers boring?
I find surfing vampires boring.
Ooh. Surfing vampires are the women who love them.
Wow. Okay.
Surfer vampires must die. The sequel to Surf Nazis must die. This is a great film, I think we've got going. There's a little surfing. I mean, it goes beyond the Lost Boys, because that was set in the coastal California town.
That's right.
These would be vampire surfers.
That's right.
The vampire surfers of Huntington Beach.
All right.
Dude, are you sure you want to be a vampire? Because, like, I mean, it's kind of a drag. We can't go out in the daytime, and like, it's all about blood and stuff. And like, I don't even like the look of blood, you know. I mean, when I was alive, I didn't even like go to the Red Cross because like it really creeped me out. I don't like being a vampire. Why do you want to be a vampire? I don't like it. Why should you? Now is he creepy?
I've put on the top of the screen what I'm reminded of today, where this
What's
person
that?
is saying, I'm slightly concerned by how much I enjoy watching Charles grind Vincent into submission. Well,
I'm
sir, I hope you're happy. I hope everyone's happy out there to just sort of.
All right.
You got what you wanted.
I take exception. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want everyone listening to write Don Vincenzo a note of love and support.
No, I don't want these things because.
You don't want love and support now?
I don't want love and support. No, I don't. I don't want your kind of love and support.
What are you talking about?
It's like, because your kind of love and support is like Edward Scissorhands, where you're coming to hug me, but it's going to kill me. And it's like, what? I'm trying to help. Well, yeah, but you've got scissor hands.
You see how misunderstood I am? How hurt? All right, look, if you won't take love and support from our family of happy off-the-menu viewers, would you take it from a smaller group?
Like what?
Surfer vampires.
No. All right, we're moving on.
All right, well.
Surfer vampires.
All right, no more vampires tonight.
Yeah. Surfer vampires must die.
Right. Ooh. You'd break up their surfboards and make steaks out of them.
Yes.
Man, that's a waste of one real tasty bodyboard, man. Wow. Why is the guy breaking it up like that?
All right,
Branislav. Man, there are vampires on this beach.
All right. Have some respect. Have some consideration.
Surf vampires must die. All right, go ahead.
All right.
What's next?
Branislav says, I get the reason of being or staying in the Knights of Columbus, referring to his question from previous episode. However, knowing where your money is going is especially for Catholics very important, I think. In a lot of episodes, Charles mentions his father, which on the saying that Christ is present in the Eucharist in memory and thought was replying that this way is going to be his money in the church. This is very important. We do not think about it like this, but money is imaginary and always only a placeholder for something. Therefore, we always should know what the money we get is for. This is also where the problem with indirect tax comes in. Do you think that for those that have big families, it would be better to build the Catholic community in his surroundings by means of money and such, and instead of relying on retirement funds, relying on the community, family around him? Maybe it is not well expressed, but I hope you get my point.
I think so. Well, I mean, obviously, family and friends are always more reliable than anything else. But if you live in a setup where you really can't avoid paying for pensions, you might as well take advantage of it. But still, if you get married, I mean, look, be the kind of friend that people will stand by, i.e., someone who stands by your friends. If you get married, raise your children in such a way that they know the way things ought to be. I mean, I'll give you an example. When my mother was dying and when Brother Mary was on his way out, my nephews often subbed for my brother and me. Why? Because they've been raised to believe that that's what you did for elderly relatives and friends. That was just, and there wasn't even a question about it. The only question was who would watch whom when. but that was the culture that my brother instilled in his family that we both picked up from our parents. Now, unfortunately, his two best friends died at about the same time of different cancers. And he had to make sure that each of them got the last rites because their families wouldn't have. They were nominally Catholic. Um, a very different culture. And by culture I don't mean ethnic. I mean a familial culture. You have to build in your own family the idea of looking after your nearest and dearest. As far as the rest of it goes, if the state requires money out of you to build an old age pension, well, then the state requires money out of you, and you don't have a choice. But even that pension can't take the place of loved ones. Why? Because if you go into a facility when you're old and you don't have an outside advocate, you don't have people coming in every day to check on you, you really are at the mercy of the facility. And very often that's not a good thing.
Yeah. All right. And he also asks, how would you define monastic spirit? In my opinion, it is considerable and probably needed to be rethought. How much one can do evangelistic work on the internet as a Benedictine monk, for example, or if not more, would be done with being there in person.
Yeah, of course, the monastic spirit is simply devoting oneself entirely to God and withdrawing from the world to do so. But as we also know, that doesn't mean completely cutting oneself off from the world unless one's called to be a hermit, which is not that large a calling. I would say that um, working with the internet can be a real apostolate, but obviously how you fit that into the monastic setting depends upon the particular monastery and what else they've got going. I don't think there's a one size fits all.
All right, a question from Sean, superfan Sean.
Okay.
He says, Pax vobiscum domini. A few related questions for Monsieur Coulombe, if I may. What's the deal with Empress Irene? It seems our boys in the West didn't think a chick could be the Roman emperor. Is that secular sedevacantism really why Pope St. Leo III crowned Charlemagne? Granted, she sounds like a pretty nasty bird, what with killing her son and all, but she did put the kibosh on iconoclasm, at least till the 1960s, so she can't be all bad. Is there any theological reason why a woman can't be empress? Is it a different analysis than that of a woman being a run-of-the-mill queen regnant?
Well, firstly, Irene, because of her dealings with iconoclasm, is actually revered as a saint in some parts of the East. So I put that out there for whatever it's worth. There were no reigning empresses of Rome, no reigning Holy Roman empresses. So they did have some trepidations regarding that in Byzantium. But beyond that, and perhaps more important, was the fact that regardless of who was running Byzantium, they were not capable any longer of defending Rome against the Lombards or of imposing any kind of order on the West. And so basically, the biggest thing Pope St. Leo III was doing was to revive the empire in the West. And of course, there had been two empires or two emperors in one empire before. So in his mind, he was simply reviving what had been existing, not creating something new. There was a move afoot to marry Irene to Charlemagne, which certainly would have produced some interesting results. It didn't happen. So I don't know, but I don't know if there's any theological objection to a woman being empress, but it wasn't done except for Irene.
Who was Theodora?
She was the wife of Justinian.
Oh, so she wasn't an empress.
which she was, but an empress consort, not an empress regnant.
Okay.
It's like Queen Elizabeth II is the Queen of England. She reigns.
Yeah.
But her mother was only the queen consort, the wife of the king.
I see. Okay. All right. A question from Marianne, super fan Marianne, who's been a fan for forever. She says, Dear Charles and Vincent, I was baptized Lutheran as a child and have been trying very hard to become Catholic, but I face strong opposition from my husband, especially since COVID-19. Now he uses it as an excuse to prevent me from going to Mass and, quote, exposing us all to the virus, unquote. I'm so desperate, I told him I'd even get the vaccine. He says it's only 50% effective. There's also the matter of needing to be remarried in the church. He's agnostic and thinks I'm crazy, that Christianity is crazy. How hard should a woman in my position fight while also being submissive and keeping the peace in my family? Do you know of any saints in a similar situation who had no access to the sacraments? Thanks so much for all you guys do. You're in my prayers.
Well, to answer the last question first, I'm sure there were. I can't think of any. But I could recommend St. Marguerite Douville as a patroness of difficult marriages. You basically, what I would do is I would write him a note, and I would ask him if he expects you to respect his agnosticism.
Why
and if
a
he
note?
does, write a note. These things, the problem with trying to talk this stuff out is that very often past disputes will simply be rehashed that have nothing to do with the issue at large. One of the things you find with couples who've been married for a while is that, I'd like to become a Catholic. Oh, I get it. It's all about what happened at the resort 12 years ago. No, it's got nothing to do with that. Oh, I see.
I see. Okay, so don't drag in the personal history.
Nothing extraneous at all. And when you write, you can choose your words much more carefully than when you try to speak and are partially driven by emotion. You can read it 1,000 times before you send it till it sounds right. But I would basically ask him if he expects you to respect his lack of belief. If he does, then you can say that you feel then that you have the right to expect him to respect your belief. Since obviously you have no use for his unbelief, but out of love for him, you'll respect it. You should be able to expect the same in return. Unless he's going to say that he knows the truth absolutely, and that he knows that the Catholic faith is wrong and there is no God. But if that's the case, then he's not an agnostic, so he has to say what he is instead. Now you have a child, and there's a problem there, because the child has to be raised something. So your duty, above all, is to your child to make sure that the kid gets the faith and that you yourself get it. This can be very difficult. And of course, it's very possible that your husband may use whatever unpleasantries lie in your mutual past and throw them up in your face. You can't let yourself get angry. All you can do is repeat forcefully, this is what I want. And since you don't place any value in it, you shouldn't have any problem with my pursuing it. Especially because it's a faith that demands I stay married to you. If you think about it, it's far better that I become a Catholic than I don't. Why do you think Bill Gates married a Catholic? Because it didn't do him any good. She was a modern Catholic and she's dumping him anyway because he's a schmuck. But there it is.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of duty for Catholics. Like, I have to treat you well. I have to. He could invoke Saint Paul.
He could.
Yeah, if he
And
was
you could
abiding
beat
by
him
it.
to it. You could beat him to it. You say, because I'm a Catholic, I have to listen to St. Paul and quote it. If I had your lack of belief, I could simply tell you to go stuff it.
It's very true.
Yep. I could say, you know what? I don't need you. And as far as getting remarried goes, you can explain to him that this will bind you to him ever more tightly. Whereas, if he doesn't remarry you in the church, if a marital situation is not sorted out, then if you left him in the eyes of the church, you would never have been married anyway. So you'd be free to marry, and you could find a real man. No, don't say that. But you know what I mean. So basically, his position in your life is being reinforced by your becoming a Catholic. Whereas if you agreed with him, his position in your life would be less important, and he would have much less of a hold over you. Well, it's true. I mean, if she were an agnostic like him, and he annoyed her, bye-bye, bye-bye. You know how I know?
How?
I done seen it.
We'll keep you in our prayers, Marianne. It's a difficult sitch.
It's extremely difficult, but keep up your prayers, and somehow or other it'll work out one way or the other. You may end up converting him if he's got a brain. We'll see.
Oh, so now you believe the intellect over the will?
No, but I mean, let's put it this way: they do cooperate very closely. And if you're just flat out stupid, chances are your will might be a little, damaged as well.
Okay. All right.
They might reinforce each other. Bad will and stupid intellect.
Yeah. All right.
Maybe there is such a thing as objective truth. No, there isn't. That's the will, the bad will, and the stupid intellect cooperating to a common ruin. I don't like the idea of hell. That's because there isn't any. Oh, okay.
That's a good reenactment, Charles. I like that.
Yeah. The will and the intellect screwing each other up.
Okay, final question today is from Daniel, who's got a monster of a question, to be honest. This is a great question, Daniel. Thank you for sending it in. Dear Charles, you have mentioned before what you have changed, what you would change about the U.S. Constitution. But what would you change about the United Nations? Would you abolish it, abolish parts of it, or modify it in some other fashion? Do you think the bad outweighs the good? And if so, what would you do to change that? Would the world be a better or worse place without it if it were dissolved today? Wow. Wow.
As we speak, I'm looking at a rendition of the UN flag. The white globe surrounded by wreaths out of the blue field. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
I've taken the tour, of the New York headquarters of the United Nations. I've stood in the meditation room, which doesn't really look much of anything. It's got a big block. And I've gone to the Catholic parish of the United Nations, Holy Family. It's the only place in the world with the Vatican flag on one side and the UN flag on the other. It's the US flag. You excited by that?
God bless the UN.
Ooh, loaded, laws of mercy. I don't believe I done heard that. Well, the problem is that the UN does some things that are really, really good and does a lot that's really, really bad. So, how would I change it? I would excise all the gender, racial, and LGBTQ MRXL5 ideology from it.
But that's like those are just ideologies that the members espouse. That's not changing the structure. You know?
No, but the thing is, the problem with the world state, which is what people look at the UN as being the structure of, is that said state really has to have an ideology, that is to say, a religion of its own. Now, what it has today is the gloppy Western faith, which is adopted by a lot of people. I mean, India's elite are quite Western, not in the sense of being Christian, but in the sense of being all for abortion and so forth. So, I guess the problem, of course, is that the UN does reflect the governments of which form it. As you know, the General Assembly functions like the lower house. Are you familiar with what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I just have a question bubbling up that I'm waiting to
Yeah.
ask. So let's get into the structure a little bit. So it's
All
my
right.
understanding that you've got 4 or 5 countries who have a special place, right? It's
You have
like
5 countries:
China, Russia,
China,
United States,
Britain, and France.
Britain, and France. And they have veto power, if I understand
Right.
that correctly. So that's why that's why Taiwan is not listed, because it says no.
Well, it was.
Oh, was it?
Well, yeah. So you've got to bear in mind what the United Nations are. The United Nations are the descendants, as it were, of the victors of World War II.
Got it.
The allies against Italy, Germany, and Japan were called the United Nations.
Yeah.
And that was transformed into this world organization afterwards. And that was intended early on in 1944. So, what were the big 5 allied nations? Well, they were Roosevelt's United States, de Gaulle's France, Churchill's Britain, Stalin's Russia, or Soviet Union, and Chiang Kai-shek's China. When Chiang Kai-shek was overthrown in the mainland in 1949, he and his government went to Taiwan and held on to it. And they retained their seat in the United Nations until 1971-72, when they lost it with the connivance of the United States, because we had already, under Nixon, gravitated toward Red China. And then in 1979, the worthless Jimmy Carter made it formal and recognized Red China and broke off relations with the Republic of China and Taiwan. And bearing in mind that 3 times during the war, the Japanese had offered to make peace with Chiang, and 3 times he refused, and if he'd accepted it, not only would China have been freed of Japanese forces, but 1 million men of the Kuomintang army would have been free to throw at the west coast of the United States. So you'd be able to watch The Man in the High Castle as current events and not as fantasy. But it didn't happen. So what you end up with then, with all this good stuff, is the Security Council was made up of the Big 5, as they were called. Now, there were not that many members to begin with, because remember, a great many of current members were then colonies. You had the Big 5, you had the smaller European countries, Portugal, Scandinavia, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, Germany, and Italy were not admitted until 1955. None of the African countries except Ethiopia and South Africa and Liberia were members. In Asia, Thailand.
Okay, so where are we going with this?
Well, when you had the wave of decolonization, which the UN helped push for after World War II, suddenly you had 150 or more nations in the United Nations, where before you had many fewer. And this made the organization a lot bulkier. Then, starting in 1948, they began getting into direct peacekeeping, which is an interesting field all on its own. During the years from 48 to 91, you had the Cold War rivalry going on. So the UN would work best where neither the Soviets nor the Americans were interested. And that's still true today, that they tend to work best in areas, the peacekeeping tends to work best in areas where no big power, no big outside power is involved. It's just a question of getting locals to lay down their arms and play nice together.
So that was going to be my question, or something like that. Whereas, do you think, would you keep the big five, basically, and would you keep what the powers that they have, the powers and influence that they have now?
Well, I'd expand it. I would firstly, I would add Germany, Italy, and Japan, partly to show that the war was over, and partly because they are major powers in their own right. I would also add Argentina and Brazil, and maybe India.
Yeah. Okay. And so that would solve some of these problems.
Some, I mean, it would certainly make the Security Council more independent. Now, the executive side of the UN is run by the Secretary General, and he's selected by the General Assembly. Again, the part of the problem we've got is the dominant philosophy of the membership, which is why you have so many terrible things adopted by the General Assembly. But like our federal government, I mean, well, in terms of structural alteration, there are certain things that I would put beyond the UN's fiat, and those have to do with what we call social issues. I don't think the UN should have a right to impose the views of the world's leadership upon the world's peoples. And of course, if the Secretary General is in effect the head of government, to complete itself, the UN needs a head of state to give direction.
Okay.
An emperor.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So we're coming. We don't have much time left on the show. Maybe 5-10 minutes. Could potentially, in some weird, bizarro Charles Coulombe world, could in Star Spangled Crown Part 2, could the United Nations be refashioned into the Holy Roman Empire?
Well, I suppose it could be. It's funny you say that, because if you look very carefully at Star Spangled Crown, you'll see there were intimations that that was happening, that the Holy Roman Empire was being slowly, gradually reformed.
Wow.
So if I ever did a Star Spangled Banner, a Star Spangled Crown 2, It might very well involve refashioning the UN, and that would allow me to speak a lot about empire. Part of the problem is when we think of empire, we think of dominance and submission, like the governments we know. Put your mask on. Oh, I'm sorry. But we forget that the heart of traditional empire, the Holy Roman Empire, even the Byzantines in a weird way to a degree, was subsidiarity, as well as the altar and the throne. So I'd have to re-examine in detail, as I did the federal government. I'd have to re-examine in detail the various UN bodies and see what I would convert them into. But that would be a fun exercise.
Yeah, you love the UN. That would be just dive right in.
Well, the double eagle is the imperial standard. We every major country that has or had an empire, the imperial palaces would be that belong to the emperor. Not just Schönbrunn and the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg or the Berliner Schloss in Berlin. We give them the Forbidden City in Peking, the palace in Tokyo, the Imperial Palace in Rio, Chapultepec in Mexico, the worldwide emperor.
Wow. One can dream. All right.
One can dream. Probably, well, I mean, with our luck, he would be the last Roman emperor from prophecy. And at the very tail end of the book, we'd have to have the Antichrist arise.
I don't want to do that.
Armageddon.
This is really turning into a post-apocalyptic drama novel.
Well, which would you prefer? Now, you have two treatments. You've now acquired a movie studio. Okay?
Okay. Yes.
Franchini Productions.
Yeah.
Mark of quality. Makers of Bambi 3, The Untold Story.
Okay.
Well, two scripts cross your desk. Which would you reject? One, it is the post-apocalyptic imperial story.
Okay.
The other is entitled Surf Vampires Must Die.
I would reject Surfer Vampires Must Die. Even though
you're the author of it.
I'm the author of Surfer Vampires Must Die now?
Yes. So you hate your child.
You've contorted and twisted and perverted this scenario into I'm a self-hating writer, but I write about vampires.
Yes, and a producer and director because you own Franchini Productions.
Well,
can I play Big Daddy? I run the surf shop garlic market in the town. I sell garlic to people who live on the beach. They need it a lot.
Oh, Charles, this is just.
Dude, that's some gnarly garlic. Could you throw it away?
Okay, let's just roll with it. I'm the self-hating writer, director, producer that produces surfer vampire movies.
There we go.
Let's go. Okay.
All right. Dude. I gotta suck your blood because I get hungry, but man, my heart's just not in it. I mean, it is so uncool. Harsh is your mellow, And the red, it gets all over my t-shirt. You know how many of these things I go through? Because the red stuff, oh, man. Dude, you don't want to be a surfer vampire. It's hard.
Sad. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you guys have enjoyed it.
Not quite, smart guy.
What do you got?
You're not getting away that easily.
What do you got?
Apart from today being Juneteenth and Maximilian's death day, and apart from St. John's Eve coming up, Tomorrow, Sunday, the day before you all actually see this, unless you're a proud patron, in which case you could feel guilty for not remembering. Tomorrow is Father's Day.
That's right.
So remember your dads, ladies and gentlemen. If you still got them, love them. If you don't got them, pray for them. If you don't want them, go out and see a surfer vampire movie.
All right. Well, one question for you. If it's Monday, what is it?
Off the menu.
But what about the soul you save?
At a guess, it may be your own.
All right, then. See you next time, everyone.
God bless everyone. 2 more episodes till number 200. Sent to you directly from the Tumbler House Tower studio. God bless all. Stay cool.